Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Enterprise AI Show. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and today we've got something a little unique, a little different for the Enterprise AI Show. Somebody who has never been on the Enterprise AI Show, actually, but a familiar face, a familiar voice, somebody who you all know very well, and we're going to get to that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Nasuni. There's a growing gap in AI right now between what's possible in theory and what successfully works at scale inside an enterprise. The difference comes down to unstructured file data. Many AI initiatives struggle because the file data they depend on is scattered, unstructured, and disconnected from where and how work actually happens. Nasuni changes that. It brings your unstructured file data into a single, secure foundation so AI, both generative and agentic, can access it with the context, governance, and performance it needs in production. Bring AI to where your unstructured data lives. See what it takes to activate your data for AI and request a demo at nasuni.com/AI. Today's show is sponsored by ShareGate. You're out of time. Copilot needs to be deployed ASAP, but your tenant really isn't ready for it. Years of data, permissions, and users lurk in its shadows, ready to be exposed by AI. ShareGate Protect sees it all, so you can find the exposure risks, fix them fast, and deploy AI with confidence. Microsoft 365 Governance, they've got this. Learn more at sharegate.com/protect. And we're back. And some of you, if you're watching this on video, might be going, hey, who is that guy to your left or your right? You know, joining us from Witness Protection, from a tour of the world, from formerly the Cloudcast, Aron Delp. Welcome back to the show, man. Good to have you on. It's been a little while.
It's been, weeks, months. I don't even know what to call this. It hasn't been years.
No, it hasn't been years, but it's been a little bit.
Yeah, it's good to see everyone. Good to be seen again. It's good to see you. Like, we haven't hardly talked at all either recently. We both were like, before we record, we're like, what you been up to, man? Because we haven't talked in forever. It's been crazy. So.
Yeah. Well, before we jump into all sorts of AI news, have you been watching the World Cup or keeping up with that at all?
Yeah. Been watching some games. I mean, here and there when I can. The one that was most interesting, for those that don't know, I work for an AI company headquartered in Paris. And I was in Paris last Friday night for the France game.
Okay.
And pretty crazy, pretty fun. Like, just kind of walking around, and all the cafes are just absolutely freaking packed with people wearing jerseys. It's certainly a fun time.
Yeah.
Be in Paris for sure.
Yeah, I haven't been. I feel like I've had a game on at least every other night or so. Like, it'll just be on. I don't really have a rooting interest. My wife is deeply following all sorts of the human interest stories. So, like, she was, almost went up to Boston on a whim to go hang out with the Tartan Army, the Scottish guys, and so she's deeply involved with anything having to do with, like, just human interest stories around it. So, but yeah, we'll see. I think we're recording this right around the end of June. So I think by the time we record next time, I don't know how long the whole thing lasts, but we'll probably have a World Cup champion. It seems like right now, the only two real big storylines I've sort of seen are, like, the African countries are doing really well, and then all of the countries you expected to get through to the next round have all gotten through. So there haven't been any really big upsets at this point.
Yeah, no big surprises so far. Good for you.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, cool. Well, let's dig into some AI news of the month. I looked high and low. I looked under rocks, under crevices. I could not find any good old fashioned cloud news. So the cloud didn't have much for us. Nothing to see here. Move along. When I was thinking about themes for this, it did feel like a month in which there was, I don't want to say there was like a lot of negative news, but there was a lot of news that sort of felt like, oh yeah, that's the reality that sets in around enterprise when you start talking about AI stuff, right? So, I feel like last month, the month before, we were talking about things like token maxing. Now we're starting to see people kind of come back to life and be like, hey, how about we do like token minimizing and token slowing down and stuff, some stuff like that. So, I think that happened a little bit. I think some of that had to do with just some news around the IPOs, and the IPOs, maybe being a little, softer or a little more muted than people necessarily expected. But what jumped out at you as you were looking through the big news of the month that kind of caught your attention?
Well, so I want to talk about the token maxing real quick, and the token minting, or whatever, was the opposite. I found that one to be one of the funniest quick trends in this industry in a long time. And here's why. You and I have been around this game a while, and we know, like, hey, if you want to measure people, and people know about that measurement, they're always going to game the system. And the second it was like, hey, we're going to measure you in your token usage, I was like, boy, that's a terrible friggin' idea. And it took all of a couple weeks for that to be a terrible idea. And so like for me, it was just like, do we learn nothing? Like even with all the things that have come to AI and everything that's going on, human nature still prevails through of like, hey, if you measure a metric, humans are going to game that metric.
Right. Yeah. No, it's
not really an AI story. That's a human story.
Yeah. No, it feels like every few years we forget that like the really big quote unquote, and I'm kind of air quoting, trends that come out of Silicon Valley, that on the surface you go, God, that makes no sense whatsoever. That wouldn't fly anywhere else in the world. That like it doesn't take long for that to not fly anywhere else in the world. So when whether it's the latest sort of weird diet fad coming out of Silicon Valley or basically puffing your chest out to be like, how many tokens did I use? Like,
well, so I got a question for you, and we'll get into the news here in a second. But I kind of want to read the I don't know which way the winds are blowing, because I feel like before I went on my hiatus from the show here, Google was on top of the world and could do no wrong.
Yeah,
and I don't feel like that's the case anymore. And like I don't know, like where are the winds blowing right now, Brian?
Well,
tell everyone what's happened here recently.
Yeah, I think the thing that Brandon and I have sort of come to an agreement upon as we've been doing cloud news or AI news of the month is like everybody gets their moment and then very quickly their moment sort of goes away, and
yes,
I think that's sort of the news cycle is that, every couple of months somebody, piles up all of their announcements or all of their talking points or all of their media blitzes. And, in some cases it turns out really well. Like, like you said, like Google a few months ago sounded like they had their act together. Like they had the right engineering. They were aligned to a model that was really working. They'd figured out a business model. I mean, they were printing cash on top of the cash that they were printing, all these things. But, it's not unlike what we saw, a few years ago with Microsoft, where it's like, man, they got their act together. And then, we've seen what feels like rotating months sometimes between Anthropic and OpenAI. And so, I think to a certain extent, the takeaway I have from it is a couple of things. Number one is they're not all that different from each other. All right. I mean, they some of them have some structural advantages, but it feels like number one, maybe they're not all that different from each other, right? So the whole like, can you tell which model's best? I don't know. It feels like at any given day, some of the smart people from one of the companies is going to go jump ship to the other company, and people are going to react to that accordingly. And then I think the other big thing is like they all have so much money that even when they make mistakes, it's sort of like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I'll see you in a month, fix your mistake or come out with something new. And so, yeah, I don't know. It does. I mean, one of the things I heard recently, I was at an event recently, I think I talked about it in the last show, like there does very much feel like a distinct difference from a year ago to now where people were like, oh yeah, we're all in on Copilot or we're all in on Gemini or whatever it would be. And now there feels like a very distinct, we're not really sure which one's going to win. We're trying to work around being, tied to one of them specifically, right? So I do get the sense that the market is kind of understanding the dynamics. They're not exactly sure how to deal with them, but they're trying to build some buffers in for themselves so that, if something crazy happens, they're not completely locked into something.
Yeah. And you know what this reminds me of? And the early days of networking in like the Cisco and, like Bay Networks and all of those others where it was like everyone had to have some kind of, carrier, if you will, or, transport layer. And Cisco always wanted to sell you all the bells and whistles because if they sold you the bells and whistles, they locked you into their thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then all the others had their, proprietary features that they wanted to sell you because it would lock you into their thing. And all everyone wanted was just basic packet transfer. And everyone wanted the ability to figure out which one was cheaper. And yeah, it was a pain to rip them out and put the other one in. But like no one wanted to be locked in, but everyone wanted the features. And it just feels like everything old is new again. kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, there's, people want their cake and eat it too, right? They want, it's the old saying, like you can be fast, cheap, or features, like lots of features, fast or cheap, pick two. And, right now people are, again, I think this goes back to this thing we keep saying, like we seem to forget that with every new big trend, some of us have lived through it before, and others are new to the thing, and they just don't realize, like, you're gonna pick two out of the three at some point. You don't think you need to right now, but you will eventually pick two out of the three, and they have their trade-offs, and the market, the market sort of shakes itself out so that there's going to be the one that is expensive with lots of features, and you're going to be locked in, and then there's going to be the one that's cheap with less features, and you're going to have to do some work to work around it, and you might decide that it commoditized itself, and so yeah, it's going to be interesting in all those same ways. I think I think the thing we're trying to figure out is, like, where is it going to be different? Where does it not look like stuff that we've seen before, just with a different paint color on it or something like that?
Yeah, and maybe that's where we dig into some actual news stories here. I mean, in the notes here, I mean, we have a good page of AI news, but I mean, we're not going to go through all of them. But I mean, what are some trends here that kind of jumped out?
Well, I think the biggest news out of this month really had to do with the intersection of, like, well, in particular, the U.S. government and these models, right? So we had Fable and Mythos from Anthropic come out. So it was Mythos had been announced as sort of preview. It was the scary security centric LLM that was so scary and so powerful that Anthropic was only going to allow certain people to have it. And then they made another announcement that was like, hey, we went from like the first 50 customers to like 150. So it was like, there was a sense of like, oh, cool. Like they worked out some things, and these companies, that have access to it, that manage, critical infrastructure, are, happy to have their hands on it. And then they were like, no, we're expanding that out to 150. And what you weren't really sure of was like, okay, that was pretty quick. Did you really get enough feedback to feel like it was controllable or manageable? Or was this just like, no, I got an IPO potentially coming up, I want to get it out there? And then, of course, we saw here, a week or so ago that the U.S. government came along and said that they're suspending Anthropic's, to foreign nationals access to Fable and Mythos, right? So, I think that came along. We saw the U.S. government telling OpenAI to maybe, could you guys slow down how fast your releases are coming out? We saw the U.S. government having a executive order talking about, trying to emphasize innovation, but at the same time trying to like put certain controls around stuff. So I think we're starting to very quickly get into an interesting interaction between these frontier models who, not only are they sort of at the leading edge of the technology, but, oh, by the way, they're both very close to being like, we're either filing for IPO, we're very close to filing for IPO. We'd like to get this out in the marketplace so we can get some more money. And, the U.S. government and, the various entities around the U.S. government being like, we would like to have you drive innovation, but at the same time, we have to do certain things for security and protection of, national security and defense and all sorts of stuff. So that felt like the biggest story of the month in lots of different, played out in a bunch of different characters.
And so here's what I also have an interesting theory.
Yep.
I hadn't had a chance to talk about this on the show, but in the Software Defined Talk Slack, I know I mentioned it once or twice there. There's been a theory that a lot of the Chinese models tend to do mass distillation of the big models.
And for anybody who's not familiar with that, what does that mean? You're now in the model world.
So distillation is basically taking a larger, better model. And in this instance, because it's API, because there's different kinds of distillation, because this is API, like basically shooting queries at the API, getting answers back and figuring out how it's going to answer, how it thinks. And you don't have like, if you had full access, you could get like the chain of thought and the reasoning commands and all the other stuff behind the scenes. But in this instance, you're basically shooting an API, you're getting the answer, and you're distilling down and getting from it how it reacts to certain things. And Anthropic has been very vocal, but I think it's been decently well known. Now, by the way, I don't want to 100% say, oh, all Chinese models are distilled from American models. No, it's not. But is it a additional tool in the tool chest? Probably.
Yeah, sure. Oh, well, I mean, look, I mean, you're not making any sort of like crazy statement. Chinese technology companies have been very well known for,
Yes.
kind of reverse engineering
Yes.
stuff that came out of the US. So this isn't any different. Yeah.
So the idea here is like, well, okay, the reason why the Chinese models have always been about 6 months or so behind is because that's how long it takes to distill everything down and then republish it.
Yep.
Well, if this is truly limited, in a couple months, we're going to see a pretty big drop off in Chinese models because they haven't had access to the latest ones to distill them. So that's been kind of a running thing I've been like in the back of my head thinking about.
Right.
But I mean, here's the thing, like the big point is, yes, obviously both Anthropic and OpenAI race for IPOs. And then, oh, by the way, OpenAI may be putting theirs off already, even though they confidentially filed. And I don't know, it's been this weird ever since, SpaceX kind of entered the race by like absorbing up XAI, and then they ended up, being the first to IPO under SpaceX. It's really interesting to see the economics of all of this and the economics end game. For us, it's always been, hey, you start a startup and then you either get bought or you IPO. And
Right.
Some people refer to it as the exit, or some people refer to it as the start. And, that's the starting line and you've got a different finish. But either way, what has been the end game for a lot of these large labs? I guess we're going to kind of find out, because we're kind of in uncharted water when it comes to the government kind of stepping in. And it's some of this.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting because, whether you were sort of like pro AI and you were like, look, I know there's a lot of spending on this, but it's building towards something big. And I know that the numbers maybe don't seem like they immediately make sense, but you would have had the same philosophy when the internet was kind of growing out, or, you're on the sort of Ed Zitron side of the spectrum where you're like, this is all going to bust. It's a giant bubble and so on and so forth. Like it does feel a little bit like some of the forces that will impact that are starting to come together, right? Like we're seeing some IPOs. We saw Cerebus, we saw SpaceX. Now the numbers they put out there seemed fairly high. They saw some initial bounce, but now we're starting to see them sort of fall back to so gravity's sort of pulling them back down to reality. We've seen some concerns about do we have availability of data centers and energy, and where are these guys going to find money from, and whether it's the money that went into investing in SpaceX or whether it went into the Google just had a new round of funding and so forth. It does feel like maybe the sources of money are starting to become a little tighter. Maybe they're going to cost a little bit more. It does feel like we're and I don't know if we'll realize this through some sort of crash or whether we'll just sort of see this sort of gradual moving into a new normal. But it does feel like we're at the beginning of whatever AI is going to start to look like at sort of the end, the economics of its first phase are starting to shape up a little bit. And that's probably a good thing, because it is really hard to understand a market when the dynamics of it aren't really based in any sort of reality or formula or model that we're sort of used to. Like as humans, we're sort of used to doing things that feel like something else. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think the SpaceX thing is interesting to me only again, like I don't really care about the rocket stuff and the outer space stuff and so forth, but it is interesting to see how quickly they sort of moved out of the game, right? Like it was like we bought a bunch of capacity, but really nobody's paying us for the capacity, so now we're going to just quickly become sort of a neo cloud, but we don't really play in any other way. And you're like, okay, well that's fine, like that's the market adapting, but like a lot of the other things feel like they're, for good or for bad, going in a direction that feels a little bit sort of more natural and normal than some of the craziness we've seen so far.
Yeah, but I'm going to add this too, because I saw it on X actually earlier today. It's so interesting too how quickly things can change, even in like what you were just talking about with that. Space buys Cursor for $60 billion, which first of all, Cursor, $60 billion. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
To everyone for a second. But then too, they've already announced, okay, they've merged a lot of the Cursor code, into, I don't know, whatever Grok or XAI or whatever the latest model. I can't keep up with them anymore. And you're already seeing, I want to say it was DeepSeek level, coding and all these other things. And so like, hey, maybe they're back in the game. But But XAI was, or Grok was basically all but dead because all the founders left. And you basically had, Colossus 1 and Colossus 2 sitting there doing nothing because you literally didn't have an AI company anymore. And so now you have an AI company again, all of a sudden.
Well,
we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe what I read out of that. So the price of Cursor, part of that I sort of chalk up to like, okay, we live in stupid times. So people are paying stupid money. And at least for a few days there, like SpaceX was living on very stupidly valued money. So they spent more than they should have, but like they didn't really, they lost their team. I mean, I guess the thing that sort of jumps out at me is how fragile it feels like maybe even all of these frontier labs are, that the small number of people who know how to do this stuff at any point in time could just get sick and tired of their boss or tired of whatever it is and either like leave or go do something. I mean, like that feels much more fragile than we've ever really dealt with. I mean, I know, like you and I lived through the time when there was only so many people that understood like OpenStack, and then they would work it somewhere and then they would sort of leave and go somewhere else. But like, you never felt like, I heard the AT&T's OpenStack team all moved and went over to like Morgan Stanley. You never felt like, oh, well, AT&T's not going to be able to process any phone calls anymore. Or like, oh, Morgan Stanley's not going to be able to process any bank transactions. Yeah. But like in this case, like it does feel like, if tomorrow, like 40 people from OpenAI were like, oh, we're going back to Google, or like 40 Google people were like, hey, we're going to start some new company, that all of a sudden you'd be like, I don't know that they're that good. And, like, I don't know. That does feel fairly fragile to me. And I think it ultimately goes back to the thing that we sort of knew, which was like, when this stuff got started and it was the Transformer project, which was again, 6 or 7 years ago, there weren't very many of those people. And it's not like all of a sudden, 10x or 100x of them just sort of popped out of the woodwork. So, that feels,
I mean, it goes to that, we know our audience loves, sports analogies here. We'll throw another one in here of like, okay, it's almost like this was pro sports, and there's just, we're paying all these, there's stupid money to the superstars, but there's only like 6 or 7 superstars. And like Google losing 2 big folks, one to OpenAI and one to Anthropic this month. And everyone's like, oh no, Google's dead. And it's like, I'm pretty sure they got a pretty good staff over there still. Right. But that's just how, I don't know if it's like just the drama, like everyone's kind of following it because it's headlines, and like this has become something that just is quote unquote newsworthy now. Like, does this really, really mean, like, will it turn into actual material differences?
Well, I think
companies? I don't know.
I think it's one of those things where, again, you're starting from a very small base of people, right? And if you go back to, like, I don't know, there was a website somewhere that was like, hey, here's where all the original people used to be that used to be at like Google Brain, or it was like, here's where they started. Then half split over, went to OpenAI, and then there was this sort of distillation of a bunch of people, right? Like the folks that run your company, came out of that world, and there's 50 other companies that a few of them went and worked at places. So it kind of got distilled, and then we've seen some moved here, some moved there, but like we haven't, like that number hasn't exploded in any way, right? It's not like, oh, all of a sudden they all took a master class, and there's 10,000 more of those people. So I think we're seeing a little bit of, and we saw this at Microsoft. Like Microsoft tried to, build the super team. They're going to build the super intelligence team. And, on paper, people were like, oh, they hired a lot of really smart people. They threw a lot of really smart money at smart people. And then it was like, but it's not working out. Oh, why is it not working out? Oh, because they have personality conflicts. And you're like, oh yeah, this is exactly what happens. Where like, smart people don't want to work for managers they don't get along with, or somebody wants to be in charge of the team, but not everybody can be in charge of the team. And so you got to, I think we're seeing those sort of natural things happen. And then I think I think there's a certain amount of these people also starting to realize like, hey, we're probably getting really close to me getting that super payday, and I better go get that before maybe this doesn't work out. Right. Like maybe I'm only getting the like super good payday, not the super, 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 super good payday. And, so you get irrational behavior, and, and because the press and analysts don't know how to determine is, scientist number 7 better than scientist number 11, it's like, oh my God, somebody left. So
yeah. I mean, you look at it this way, just in the past, I don't know, 12-ish months.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the Meta team left. And then everyone's like, oh my gosh, Meta's done. They're not a frontier lab anymore. And then, Microsoft and all their problems. And you look at Google and, like Google's doing good, then they're doing bad, then they're doing good, then they're doing bad. Like, it almost seems like it is not even cyclic. It's almost like waves in the industry. And it is very almost clicky of like, where's the quote unquote good AI teams at any given time. And it almost seems like it has a little bit of gravity right now.
Well, yeah. I mean, and if you think about it even a little bit, like it was like, okay, the whole Grok team left. Okay, well, where did they go? Did they just disappear? The Facebook team all like quit and left. Where did they go? Did they all disappear? Microsoft has a gigantic amount of money and they're not cranking out anything on their own. So it's like the other thing it sort of says is like, and going back to your sort of Cisco analogy, like, we used to have kind of an old saying where it was like, if somebody started a networking company, we were like, well, if their founding people didn't come from Cisco, Juniper, or Stanford, they're probably not that good because they were never around learning the really hard parts of doing this stuff. So you can hire a team of super people, but my guess is like there is a certain amount of DNA that you have to have in there, like this sort of how do you do it? Like everybody wanted to make sourdough bread at COVID, but like a lot of people were like, oh, my sourdough thing didn't work. And it was like, well, God, didn't you just watch the YouTube video? Like you should have been able to make sourdough bread. I think there's a little bit of that too.
Yeah, so, completely.
But yeah, man, I feel like we're kind of moving into a little bit of, and again, this might totally change next month with a bunch of new announcements, but like this felt like a month that was very much like, it wasn't super sexy. It was a lot of like adult issues going on. Like companies are trying to, file for IPO, except now instead of acting like teenagers, somebody's like, do you actually have any money in the bank? How much money do you actually have? Or, oh, you would like to do this thing? Well, the US government would also like for you to not leak the nuclear codes out to, like it felt like a lot of stuff that was like, yeah, I guess we're going to have to do that because, that keeps societies from getting out of control or, security problems from spreading wildly. And, it's not super sexy, but it is the reality of, running things that are stable for millions and millions of people.
So Brian, is this the beginning of the trough of disillusionment?
Might be. It might be. I mean, honestly, like it was a little bit of why for like the last, month and a half, I've been trying to be very focused on enterprisey issues. And, as Brandon likes to say, like, oh God, now you're going to talk about governance and like you're going to give me a login that goes to a dashboard or something. But it's like, yeah, cost controls, governance, accountability, like at some point those things come to every market and it feels like we're right at the beginning of that. Now, that doesn't mean we won't go through a couple more, rounds of sort of irrationality, but it does feel like, yeah, Aaron might be calling it the trough of disillusionment for some of this stuff. So we'll see. We'll see. I think we'll know one way or the other when let's say like an Anthropic goes IPO and we get through a couple of quarters of like, okay, how much are they really burning through? How much are people willing to sort of bet on that one? But I think we might be getting that direction a little bit. So anything else jump out at you as far as, like you said, lots of stuff in the news, people can go dig into it and so forth.
I mean, here's a couple observations real quick. The Cerebras earnings actually, considering a first quarter after IPO, I'm decently impressed by that. I'm just going to call it out and say, yeah. I mean, hey, good on them. They did good. Just kind of looking over these headlines real quick and just making a couple quick comments. Hyundai now has full ownership of Boston Dynamics, the robots, the viral robot videos.
The dogs with guns. Yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't know, like part of me is very concerned about that. I don't know. Like I know Hyundai does more than cars, but I immediately think of like Hyundai and cars and Boston Dynamics and the videos they've done. I don't know if that's an intersection I like or I'm comfortable with, but hey, it is what it is. Like they own it now.
Yeah.
I will say this though.
Well, go ahead. Let me put it this way. Like, would you rather have like Lockheed Martin own them?
That's true. That's true. No, but I was going to say too, like I've seen SoftBank cash out of a few positions here recently too, which also may be another sign. You know, SoftBank had so much money for so long, and you're starting to see SoftBank starting to cash out, you know, here and there. Which, by the way, they had a really crazy presentation. I'm not even going to necessarily go talk about it, but if you click on one link in our show notes, go look at the SoftBank's investor presentation.
Yeah,
that's some crazy stuff.
Yeah. It's out there. Well, man, I didn't want to overwhelm you with too many things now that you're back. I don't know if, again, I don't know if you're coming back again for a few months. You might be, you might not be.
This might be a pop-up and go away, but no, I certainly hope not. You know, it was a needed period to kind of focus on the day job and adjust to everything that was going on, but coming up for air.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to see a sign of life, Aron's face will be on the YouTube video. So go check out the YouTube link.
That's right.
And it's not AI. It's actually him. So, all right, man. Well, with that, folks, that is the June AI News of the Month. And we'll be back a month from now with who knows who. Could be me, could be Aron, could be Brandon, could be 3 new guests. It could be 3 new hosts. Who knows? But anyways, folks, with that, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for giving us your time every week, a couple of times a week. We really appreciate it. And with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next month or the next week.
Thanks for listening. Check us out at theenterpriseaishow.com for past shows, newsletters, and all things enterprise AI.